There are moments in life when you look back and realize that what you survived cannot be explained by luck, strength, or coincidence. It was not chance that kept you standing when everything around you was falling apart. It was not your wisdom that carried you through storms that should have swallowed you whole. God says you were preserved for a reason. When the enemy thought it was over, heaven intervened. When the situation said, "End," God said, "Well, your life is living evidence that God's hand has been on you, even when you could not feel it." There were doors that closed in front of you that felt devastating at the time, relationships that ended, plans that collapsed, dreams that seemed buried. But what you did to know then is that God was protecting you. He was preserving you from paths that would have delayed your destiny, from people who were never meant to walk the full journey with you. Scripture reminds us that the Lord orders the steps of the righteous, and sometimes that ordering looks like redirection, delay, or even disappointment. But every step was guarded. God preserved you when others fell because your life carries divine purpose, and that truth needs to settle deep in your spirit. There are people who walked the same roads you walked, faced similar storms, stood in the same battles, yet they did not make it through the way you did. Some gave up, some lost hope, some walked away from faith, some were crushed under the weight of what you somehow survived. This is not said to elevate you above anyone else, but to awaken you to a spiritual reality, God. His hand was actively involved in keeping you. When strength failed, when answers were silent, when the outcome looked sealed, God stepped in and preserved you because your existence is tied to something far greater than the moment you were in. Preservation is not always loud or dramatic. Often it happens quietly, in unseen ways, behind the scenes of your life. God blocked things you never even knew were coming. He delayed plans you were desperate to rush. He removed people you were emotionally attached to. At the time it felt like loss, rejection, or confusion. But now, with spiritual eyes, you can begin to see that God was guarding your future. If you had received everything you prayed for back then, you might not be standing where you are today. God preserved you not by giving you everything you wanted, but by giving you what you needed to survive and continue. There is a reason Scripture reminds us that many are called, but few are chosen. Being preserved does not mean life is easier. It often means life is heavier. The more purpose you carry, the more resistance you face. That is why the attacks were intense, the pressure was heavy, and the trials felt relentless. The enemy does not waste energy on what carries no threat. If nothing was inside you, nothing would have come against you. But God allowed you to remain because what He placed in you is meant to impact lives, shift atmospheres, and reflect His glory in ways you may not fully understand yet. When others fell, it was not because they were weaker or less important, but God, in His sovereignty, chose to keep you standing. He strengthened you in moments you thought you were barely holding on. He fed your faith even when doubt was loud. He reminded you again and again not to quit. The fact that you are still seeking Him, still listening for His voice, still longing for meaning is proof that God's purpose is alive in you. Dead things do not hunger. Confused hearts do not persist. Only preserved lives keep moving forward, even when the path is unclear. God preserves vessels that will be needed later. Just like Esther was preserved in the palace for such a time as this, your survival is tied to a specific season, a specific assignment, and a specific impact. There are moments ahead where your obedience, your testimony, and your faith will matter more than you can imagine. If God had allowed you to fall when others did, something essential would be missing in the lives of people you have not even met yet. Preservation is not just personal, it is generational. It reaches beyond you. You may still question why God allowed certain wounds, certain delays, or certain losses if He intended to preserve you. But preservation does not always look like protection from pain. Sometimes it looks like strength through pain. God let the process shape you without destroying you. He allowed the fire to refine you, not consume you. Every tear watered your faith. Every disappointment sharpened your discernment. Every season of waiting deepened your trust in Him. What others collapsed under, you endured because God was quietly reinforcing you from the inside. Being preserved also means being responsible. God did not keep you alive spiritually just so you could blend in, stay silent, or live without purpose. Your life carries weight in the spiritual realm. The way you believe, the way you forgive, the way you remain faithful matters. Heaven invested in you, grace covered you. Mercy shielded you, not for comfort but for calling. The same God who kept you through the storm is now calling you to recognize why you were kept at all. If you are still here, it means God is not finished. If your heart still responds when His word is spoken, it means purpose is still active. You were preserved because your life is meant to point others back to God, to show that faith survives pressure, and to prove that God keeps what He chooses. Your continued existence is not random. It is intentional, ordained, and meaningful. God preserved you when others fell because He placed something in you that the world still needs. What tried to destroy you was allowed only to reveal God as protection, even though in the moment it felt like abandonment, silence, or loss. There were situations that rose against you with such force that you questioned whether God was still watching, whether He still cared, whether your prayers were reaching heaven at all. The pressure was not subtle. It was overwhelming. The weight of fear, uncertainty, betrayal, or grief came all at once, and it felt as though everything was unraveling. Yet, even in those moments, God's protection was active, though hidden, shaping the outcome in ways you could not yet see. Often we imagine God's protection as a life free of trouble, but Scripture shows us something very different. God protected Noah through the flood, not from it. He protected Daniel in the lion's den, not by keeping him out of it. He protected the 3 men in the fiery furnace, not by preventing the fire, but by making sure the fire did not consume them. In the same way, what came against you was not permission for destruction, but an opportunity for God's power to be revealed through your survival. The situation had limits set by God, even when it felt limitless to you. There were attacks on your peace, your identity, and your faith itself. Voices spoke doubt into your heart. Circumstances shouted that you were forgotten. You prayed, and the struggle did not instantly disappear. Yet the very fact that you are still standing is proof that the storm had boundaries. It could shake you, but it could not claim you. It could wound you, but it could not end you. God allowed the pressure so that what He placed inside you could be revealed, strengthened, and made undeniable. God's protection often shows up after the threat has passed. You realize later how close you were to making a decision that would have destroyed you, how near you came to a path that would have delayed your destiny. Looking back, you see moments where one conversation, one delay, one closed door changed everything. At the time, it felt like loss. Now you understand it was rescue. God did not always shield you from pain, but He shielded your purpose. He guarded the future He designed for you, even when the present was painful. What tried to destroy you exposed the difference between what can touch your life and what can touch your calling. Circumstances can attack your body, your finances, your emotions, and your relationships, but they cannot override God's plan. The enemy can only go as far as God allows, and when his intention is harm, God turns it into revelation. The very battle meant to silence you has now become part of your testimony. The wound that was meant to make you bitter has become evidence of God as faithfulness. There were moments when it felt like the enemy was winning, nights when fear spoke louder than faith, days when you questioned your strength and wondered if surrender would be easier than continuing, yet somehow you kept moving. You kept praying, even when words were few. You kept believing, even when your faith felt fragile. That persistence was not self-produced, it was sustained by God. His protection was not always external, often it was internal, strengthening your spirit, so you would not collapse under the weight of what was happening around you. God allowed the struggle to strip away false security. Things you depended on that were never meant to be your foundation had to fall apart, so you could discover where true safety is found. When everything else proved unreliable, God revealed Himself as constant. What tried to destroy you actually redirected you toward deeper trust. It forced you to rely on God not as a last option, but as your lifeline. That shift changed you permanently. Protection does not always mean preservation of comfort. Sometimes it means preservation of faith. God let the battle rage so that you would see that it was never your strength keeping you alive, but His presence surrounding you, and you came out clearer, wiser, and more anchored than before. You now recognize danger sooner. You discern deception quicker. You pray with deeper understanding. The threat did not defeat you, it refined you. What tried to destroy you ultimately revealed that God was closer than you thought. He was watching every step, counting every tear, and limiting every attack. The situation was real, the pain was real, but so was His protection. And the fact that you remain is proof that nothing was ever in control except God. Your preservation is proof that your story is not finished, no matter how convincing the ending once looked. There were moments when everything around you suggested closure, finality, and loss. Certain seasons felt like full stops rather than commas. Dreams went silent. Prayers seemed unanswered. Circumstances arranged themselves in a way that made it appear as though nothing more could happen beyond that point. Yet God allowed you to continue, breathe, believe, and move forward because the chapter you are in is not the last one. What looks like an ending to you is often the middle of a far greater narrative in God's plan. Many people confuse delay with denial and silence with absence. When nothing changes for a long time, it is easy to believe that God has finished working. But Scripture reminds us that God is always working, even when He is quiet. Joseph sat in prison believing his life had reached its lowest point, yet God was positioning him for a future he never imagined. Lazarus lay in the tomb 4 days, and everyone believed the story was over. But Jesus arrived when hope had expired so that resurrection would speak louder than expectation. Your survival functions the same way. God lets certain situations look final so that His next move reveals unmistakable authority. The fact that you are still here means heaven has not closed the book on your life. If God were finished, you would feel it in your spirit. There would be no hunger for meaning, no pull toward faith, no inner stirring for something more. The restlessness you feel is not frustration, it is calling. It is God reminding you that what He began in you has not reached completion. Even when your surroundings say stop, your spirit continues to stir because God, as timeline operates, beyond human conclusions. Your story did not end with the pain, the failure, the loss, or the disappointment. That was not the climax. It was a turning point. God often allows the narrative to drop so low that only His intervention can raise it again. The worse it looks, the clearer it becomes that the outcome was not self-made. When restoration comes, it carries God's signature. Your unfinished story is intentional. God preserves His people not merely to survive, but to demonstrate that He is a God of continuation, redemption, and completion. You may feel as though your best years are behind you, that opportunities have passed, that time has been wasted. But God is not bound by timelines. He restores years the enemy tried to steal. He revives purpose that seems buried. Moses began his calling at an age when many feel life is winding down. Sarah gave birth when biology said impossible. Purpose does not expire because God does not rush. Your preservation means your assignment is still active, regardless of how long the wait has been. Every step forward you take is evidence that God is still writing. Even the confusion serves the story. Even the waiting adds depth. God does not write rushed endings. He builds character, faith, and endurance so the fulfillment can be sustained when it arrives. If your life still contains tension between promise and reality, that tension is proof of something in progress. Finished stories do not wrestle. They do not hope. They do not anticipate. The very struggle you feel is evidence that God is still shaping what comes next. Your preservation also speaks to the future impact of your testimony. When God brings the resolution, it will not only restore you but inspire others who thought their own stories were over. People will recognize themselves in your journey. They will see that God does not abandon His work mid-process. Your life becomes a message that teaches patience, faith, and perseverance. God allows you to linger between pain and promise so your eventual breakthrough carries weight. There will come a moment when you look back on this season with clarity. What feels confusing now will make sense then. What feels unfinished will reveal itself as perfectly timed. The continuation of your life is deliberate. God does not preserve what He plans to discard. He preserves what He intends to complete. And as long as you are still here, breathing and believing, your story remains open, unfolding under the careful hand of a faithful God. The pain you endured was not punishment, it was preparation, even though in the moment it felt unfair, excessive, and deeply personal. There were seasons when you questioned why obedience did not shield you from suffering and why faith did not spare you from heartbreak. You may have asked yourself what you did wrong, what lesson you failed to learn, or why God allowed the weight to press so hard against you. But pain is not always a consequence of failure. Often it is the training ground for purpose. God was not correcting you, He was conditioning you for what lies ahead. Preparation is rarely gentle. It stretches capacity, exposes weakness, and forces growth beyond comfort. If God were preparing you only for ease, the process would not have required such endurance. The depth of the pain reveals the weight of the assignment. Light callings do not require heavy preparation. What you experienced shaped your resilience, sharpened your discernment, and refined your faith in ways comfort never could. God used hardship to remove shallow dependency and replace it with rooted trust. You learned things in pain that peace could never teach you. You learned how to pray when words fail. You learned how to trust God when evidence is absent. You learned how to stand when support disappears. These lessons were not random. God knew you would need this level of spiritual maturity to steward what He intends to place in your hands. Without the preparation, the blessing could have crushed you. Without the fire, the vessel would not have been strong enough to carry the oil. Pain also revealed what needed to be removed. Certain attachments, expectations, and false identities could not survive the pressure. God allowed things to fall apart because they were built on foundations that would not hold in the next season. What felt like loss was actually alignment. What felt like stripping was actually shaping. God was not emptying you, He was making room. Preparation often feels like subtraction before it ever looks like addition. There were moments when the pain felt like silence from God. But silence does not mean absence. A teacher is often quiet during the test, not because they have abandoned the student, but because the lesson is being applied. God trusted you enough to allow the process to work. He knew what He placed inside you was strong enough to endure refinement. Pain pressed you inward where a superficial faith was replaced with deep conviction. Preparation also trains compassion. What you walked through gave you understanding you could never gain secondhand. You now recognize pain in others more easily. You listen differently. You pray with deeper sincerity. God was shaping you not only for achievement, but for impact. Your wounds have become points of connection. Your scars speak to others who feel unseen. This is not accidental. God uses prepared people to heal people. Sometimes preparation feels repetitive, like the same lesson returning in a different form, but repetition builds mastery. God was reinforcing truth into your spirit so it would not crumble under pressure later. You learned patience because impatience would sabotage what is coming. You learned humility because pride cannot sustain elevation. You learned obedience because direction will matter when the stakes are higher. Every painful repetition served a purpose. Preparation also strengthens spiritual authority. Authority is not granted through words alone, it is earned through endurance. You have credibility in the spiritual realm because you did not quit when quitting looked justified. The pain you survived positioned you with weight, not noise. God prepares leaders in hidden places through unseen struggles, long before public manifestation. What feels like delay is often development. If the pain had destroyed you, it would be punishment. But it did. You endured. You grew. You are still standing. That alone proves the intent was preparation. God never wastes suffering. Every tear carried information. Every setback delivered instruction. And though the process was uncomfortable and often confusing, it was intentional. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are prepared, shaped by God, as hand for what He knew was coming next. God saved you not just from something, but for something, and that truth changes how you view every escape, every rescue, and every moment you were spared when you should have been taken out. There were times when danger came close, when loss almost claimed you, when wrong decisions nearly pulled you into permanent consequences. You may have thought you were simply lucky or that things somehow worked out, but it was never random. God's intervention was purposeful. He was not merely preventing disaster, He was preserving direction. Every time He stepped in, it was because your life was moving toward an assignment that could not be interrupted. Being saved from something is immediate relief. Being saved for something is long-term intention. God was thinking beyond the moment you were trying to survive. While you were focused on escaping the pain, He was focused on protecting the future. He saw paths you could not see. people you had not met, and outcomes you could not imagine. God pulled you back, slowed you down, or redirected you because where you were headed at that time would have cost you the calling attached to your life. What felt like delay was actually precision. There were exits you took at the last moment that now make sense. Jobs that ended suddenly, relationships that collapsed without closure, opportunities that disappeared when you thought they were perfect. At the time, you wondered why God would remove something that seemed good, but God does not remove without reason. He knows the difference between what is good and what is required. Being saved for something means certain things must be surrendered along the way. Not everything you want can travel with you into purpose. God also saved you from becoming a version of yourself that could not carry what He intends to give you. Some paths would have hardened your heart, weakened your faith, or distracted your focus. You might have achieved outward success and lost inward alignment. God intervened because He was guarding not just what you would do, but who you would become. Being saved for something means your character mattered just as much as your destination. Sometimes God saves you from small things because of big consequences. A single decision avoided, one night spared, one conversation delayed. In the moment, it feels insignificant. In the long view, it is life-altering. God's guidance often shows up as restraint. The ability to walk away, say no, or pause is also salvation. God saved you from traps disguised as opportunities because He knew what you were called to build could not survive divided attention or compromised values. Being saved for something also brings responsibility. Grace is not permission to remain unchanged, it is empowerment to move differently. God preserved you so your life could point beyond survival into service, obedience, and faithfulness. He did not rescue you just to return you to the same cycles, mindsets, and patterns. He expects growth. He expects surrender. He expects movement toward what He saved you for. You may still feel unsure about what that something is. Calling does not always arrive as clarity. Sometimes it reveals itself through obedience in small steps. Faithfulness in the present prepares you for revelation in the future. God does not always explain why He saves you. He asks you to trust that He has purpose in mind. As you walk with Him, the reason becomes clearer. God, as rescue, has positioned you for impact beyond your own life. Someone benefits from your obedience. Someone learns faith from your survival. Someone draws hope from your testimony. Being saved for something means your life is meant to be poured out, not locked away in comfort. God preserved you because your story, your strength, and your faith are needed. Every time you remember where you could have ended up, let it remind you that you were redirected, not spared by chance. God interrupted the path because He had a better one prepared. You were saved because your purpose was still ahead of you, not behind you. Your survival is a testimony meant to strengthen others. Faith, even when you never planned to be an example or a voice. You did not sign up to go through what you went through, and you certainly did not choose pain so someone else could learn from it. Yet God often turns lived experience into living evidence. The very fact that you are still standing speaks louder than explanation. People may not know every detail of your struggle, but they can see the outcome, and that outcome points to God's faithfulness. There are those who are watching you quietly. Some have observed your consistency when things fell apart. Others noticed how you did turn bitter even when betrayal had every reason to harden you. Some saw you disappear for a while and wondered if you'd return at all, only to witness you come back with deeper faith and steadier footing. Without realizing it, your survival has become a message that suffering does not cancel purpose, and that God still restores what looks lost. God uses survival to break skepticism. Words can be debated, argued, or dismissed, but a life that endured and still believes carries authority. When people see that you went through fire and did not come out empty or destroyed, it forces them to reconsider what they believe about God. Your continued faith is not theoretical, it is proven. You carry credibility because your belief has been tested and remained. You may feel unqualified to strengthen anyone's faith, because you are still healing, still questioning, still growing. But testimony is not perfection. Testimony is honesty. It is saying that you did not have all the answers, but you did not let go of God. It is admitting weakness while pointing to His strength. God uses imperfect vessels because their dependence is visible. Your story leaves no room for pride. it leaves room for God. Sometimes God allows survival rather than immediate deliverance, so the evidence of His presence is undeniable. When others see how close you were to giving up, how deep the loss cut, and how heavy the pressure became, your endurance stands as proof that something beyond human strength sustained you. That realization awakens faith in people who thought God had forgotten them too. Your life reassures them that God is still involved, still working, still faithful. Your testimony does not require a platform, microphone, or a spotlight. It shows up in conversations, consistency, and character. It is revealed when you respond with grace where revenge would be expected, when you choose hope instead of despair, when you trust God even after disappointment. These quiet demonstrations shape belief more powerfully than sermons. People notice how you handle what you did to choose. Survival also creates permission for others to speak. When someone sees that you made it through what they are currently facing, it gives them courage to open up, to ask questions, to hope again. Your experience becomes a bridge for connection. God positions survivors as safe spaces for others who are hurting. That role was not assigned randomly, it was cultivated through what you lived. God never wastes what He allows. The nights you cried alone, the moments you questioned everything, the faith you held on to by a thread, all of it has weight. It carries meaning beyond you. Even if you never tell the full story, the evidence remains in who you became because of it. Strength mixed with humility, faith anchored in reality, hope without denial. You are proof that God sustains, not just rescues. He walks through the valley, not just over it. And when others see that truth reflected in your life, their understanding of God deepens. Your survival becomes a quiet invitation for them to trust again, believe again, and keep going. Now is the season to walk boldly into the purpose God preserved you for, because preservation always points forward, never backward. God did not carry you through pain, delay, and opposition so you could remain hidden in fear or hesitation. Survival was not the finish line, it was the preparation for movement. This moment calls for courage, not because you feel ready, but because God has already proven His faithfulness in keeping you alive, steady, and responsive to His voice. Boldness does not mean the absence of uncertainty. Even now you may still feel hesitant, aware of your weaknesses, conscious of what you lack. But boldness in God is obedience in motion, not confidence in self. The same God who preserved you when you were unsure, hurting, or exhausted is with you now as you step forward. Waiting for perfect clarity can become a quiet form of disobedience. God often reveals the next step only after the first step is taken. Walking boldly also means releasing the mindset of survival. Seasons of hardship teach you how to endure, but they can also condition you to stay guarded, cautious, and withdrawn. God preserved you so you could live fully, not defensively. Your past no longer gets to dictate your pace or your reach. The very experiences that once made you cautious are now meant to fuel wisdom, not fear. Boldness is choosing movement despite memory. There is purpose attached to your presence right now. Where you are placed, the environment you are in, and the people around you are not accidental. God preserved you to occupy space with intention. Your faith, your integrity, your obedience matter in this season. Silence is no longer an option when your voice carries weight. You have lived enough to speak with substance, not theory. God is calling you to show up fully without apology for what He has carried you through. Walking boldly also requires letting go of comparison. Your journey does not need to resemble anyone else's for it to be effective. The timing, pace, and shape of your calling are unique. God preserved you with your story, not someone else's. Boldness is embracing that uniqueness rather than hiding it. When you stop trying to fit into someone else's blueprint, your obedience gains clarity and power. Fear will attempt to remind you of what you lost, what didn't work, and what hurt along the way. But God invites you to remember what you survived. Every step forward is backed by evidence that God sustains you. Your confidence does not come from the outcome. It comes from the faithfulness already displayed. The memory of God's protection becomes fuel rather than hesitation. This season also demands trust in God's timing. You may feel behind or delayed compared to where you thought you'd be. But preservation means God has guarded your moment as much as your life. There is a readiness now that wasn't present before. What once would have overwhelmed you now finds you steadied, wiser, and anchored. Boldness flows naturally from maturity. Stepping into purpose often feels uncomfortable because it stretches what has been contained for too long. God preserved you through confinement so you could move with authority when release comes. The same resistance you feel now is often confirmation that growth is happening. Purpose pushes against comfort before it settles into impact. Walking boldly does not require knowing how everything will unfold. It requires trusting the one who has already carried you this far. God did not preserve you just to prove a point. He preserved you because what is ahead requires you. And as you move forward in obedience, purpose begins to unfold, not as a distant idea, but as a lived reality shaped by every step you take in faith.